Have you ever watched the political landscape shift so incredibly fast that even the people leading the charge suddenly pause and say, wait a minute, this is going way too far? Well, that's exactly the dynamic conservative commentator Glenn Beck was reacting to recently when prominent left-wing figure Van Jones started criticizing elements within his own Democratic Party. Beck's initial reaction was this fascinating mix of disbelief and just genuine validation. He literally said, "Oh, really, Van? Really? I'm thrilled that he is there because we need people like this to actually speak out." It's a really unexpected moment of political crossover, and it perfectly sets the stage for a much bigger argument. So, welcome to today's Explainer. We've got a seriously fascinating and complex piece of political commentary to unpack together today. We're going to take an objective look at exactly how Glenn Beck analyzes the ideological trajectory of the American left. We'll be deconstructing his main arguments, his historical claims, and his core metaphors. All right, let's take a quick look at our roadmap. We're going to break Beck's arguments down into 5 parts: shifting voices on the left, the Senate's original design, redefining historical progressivism, the ideological slippery slope, and finally, truth over political teams. Okay, jumping right into part 1, shifting voices on the left. Here, the source material focuses on a perceived fracture happening right now within modern liberal politics. To really anchor this point, Beck highlights statements from traditional liberals. Take comedian and commentator Bill Maher, for instance. Maher admits he's actually lost fans recently because he just flat out refused to go along with what he calls the crazy stuff on the left. Beck groups guys like Maher and Van Jones together to make the case that traditional, old-school liberals are getting increasingly alienated by radical shifts in their own party. Shifts like, for example, activist groups actively cheering for the Intifada. Beck notes that these figures are finally reaching a breaking point and speaking out against the extremes on their own side. But then, Beck contrasts those traditional liberals with groups like the Democratic Socialists of America, the DSA. According to the source, the DSA has actively argued that the United States Senate is fundamentally undemocratic and should just be abolished, specifically targeting Article 1 of the Constitution. For Beck, this proves just how far the goalposts have moved. It sets up this huge clash between traditional liberal values and modern, radical, progressive goals. Which brings us to part 2, the Senate's original design. To counter this whole argument that the Senate is undemocratic, Beck takes us on a bit of a historical civics lesson. Beck argues that our system feels completely broken today because we've totally abandoned the founders' original blueprint. Just look at the balance they intended between the 2 chambers. The House of Representatives, that was designed to be population-driven, right? Short 2-year terms, and they entirely hold the purse strings, so the public could swiftly vote them out if they mismanaged our money. But the original Senate was totally different. It was state-driven. Senators weren't actually meant to be democratically elected by the public at all. They were chosen by state legislatures. The whole point was to ensure the states could balance out federal power. And this intended balance extends to the executive branch, too. Beck asserts that the presidency has completely drifted from its constitutional purpose. He claims the original design of the presidential veto was meant to be strictly a constitutional safeguard. Like, a president was only supposed to strike down a piece of legislation if it was unconstitutional, not just because they disagreed with it politically or, because their party opposed it. To really hammer this home, Beck uses what we can call the classic Coke principle. I love this metaphor. Think about it. If Coca-Cola tries a new recipe and it totally flops, they don't add even more weird ingredients to try and fix it, right? They just go right back to the classic recipe that worked. Or if KFC changes its 11 herbs and spices and sales plummet, they revert to the original. Beck argues that instead of abolishing our institutions or adding more layers of government when things aren't working, we should be doing the exact same thing, returning to the original recipe, which is the Constitution. All right, let's shift gears to part 3, redefining historical progressivism. Beck argues that to truly understand the modern left, you absolutely have to understand its roots. So, Beck provides a very specific definition of early 20th century progressives. He claims that figures from this era, folks like Woodrow Wilson and Theodore Roosevelt, genuinely believed America needed to move past the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Now, interestingly, he actually gives these early figures the benefit of the doubt. He notes that they championed these ideas well before witnessing the historical horrors of communism and fascism that would unfold later in the 20th century. Basically, they just didn't know what it would eventually turn into. But, according to Beck, modern progressives do know, and they follow a very distinct playbook today. Step 1, shift systems subtly. Step 2, push until the current system breaks. Step 3, blame capitalism and the founding fathers for that break. And step 4, demand hardcore radical change as the only possible solution. The source actually uses Obamacare as the primary example here, claiming it failed to deliver on its early promises of saving people money. But progressives use that failure to argue not for returning to the old system, but for implementing even more government control. And that systemic breakdown leads us right into Section 4, the ideological slippery slope. Beck describes this whole ideological journey like a train ride. Progressivism, he argues, is merely the first station. The inherent nature of progressing means you don't just stay there. The next stop is socialism, which he views as just a layover on the way to the final destination, communism. Beck's core argument is that you cannot simply hit pause on the train. The sheer momentum of progressivism inevitably pulls a society toward extreme centralization. To validate this timeline, Beck throws out a pretty staggering statistic. He points out that 51% of the board of directors for the Democratic Socialists of America are self-avowed communists. For Beck, this isn't just hyperbole or political name-calling. It's a measurable reality that he says proves this train station theory. The very people advocating for democratic socialism are, at the highest levels, steering the train straight toward communism. Now, you might be thinking, but wait, what about the counter-argument? Don't progressives always point to Sweden or Norway as socialist success stories? Well, Beck offers a harsh economic reality check on this. He argues those countries absolutely do not practice pure socialism. If you actually look at the Nordic model, it relies on a super broad tax base, meaning everyone pays heavily, not just the wealthy. They also maintain very high business freedom. Beck argues that pure socialists in America completely ignore this reality, falsely believing they can just tax the rich without causing wealth flight, where the wealth creators and businesses just pack up and leave, effectively bankrupting the system. So, this whole train of thought culminates in one absolutely vital question. When you're progressing, who finally says stop? Beck poses this as the ultimate fatal flaw in progressive ideology. If the goal is literally always progress, always moving past whatever the current system is, there's no built-in mechanism to recognize when a policy has failed so you can reverse course. Let's head into our final section, Part 5, Truth over Political Teams. This is where Beck issues a massive call to action to all Americans. He points to what he sees as the objective, undeniable results of blindly progressing in the wrong direction without ever evaluating the outcomes. He lists off a series of current, very real crises: a broke economy with an inflating dollar that's making everything way more expensive, declining education standards where kids are, quote, getting dumber and dumber, massive global instability with adversaries like Iran seeking nuclear weapons, and just constant foreign wars. For Beck, these are the empirical results of a broken system that stubbornly refuses to turn around. Which brings us to his conclusion. Beck basically pleads with the American public to stop acting like partisan cheerleaders. He argues that people just read their preferred sources, wrap themselves in their own comfortable realities, and totally stop listening to facts. He says you are either pursuing the truth or you might as well sit in the stands because you're cheering for a team. It's an urgent request to prioritize objective reality over political tribalism, if only for the sake of future generations. And that leaves us with a profound question to ponder as we wrap up this explainer today. In an era totally defined by political teams, filter bubbles, and customized realities, are we still capable of recognizing the objective truth? Beck commends figures like Jones and Bill Maher for finally speaking out and seeking that truth, even when it hurts their own team. The question is, are the rest of us willing to do exactly the same thing? Thank you so much for joining me to unpack this fascinating perspective and keep asking those tough questions.